So I took the fateful step of challenging the vaccine mandate in federal court on behalf of people like me who had natural immunity and had recovered from COVID. I thought other people should have the right to decline the vaccine as well, but that was a legal case that for various legal reasons, I thought we would be able to prevail on. So that was the nature of the case that I filed. It didn't end up winning that case, unfortunately, although if I filed it today, I probably would win under a new Ninth Circuit court precedent that appeared about a year and a half after my case. And I like to tell people, if you want to go sideways with your employer really quickly, a good way to do that is to sue them in federal court. It's very effective, very efficient. So immediately after I filed the lawsuit and the judge declined my request for a preliminary injunction, the university placed me first on what they called investigatory leave, then on unpaid suspension, and a month later, and then a month after that, they fired me. So they ran me through the paces of how to fire a full professor as quickly as possible for alleged noncompliance with the same policy that I was challenging in federal court. And they fired me before the court made a final ruling in my case too, by the way.
Let me ask you something. Did you ever listen to an episode of Ma'am and wish you could keep the conversation going? That, my friends, is why we created the Modern Ancestral Mamas Patreon community.
When you join our Patreon community, you're not just supporting the podcast, you're gaining access to a private community of like-minded women who are navigating ancestral living in the modern world right alongside you. As a member, you'll receive free ebooks and downloadable resources, including things like cookbooks and practical guides to help you actually implement what we talk about all the time on the show.
You'll also get exclusive Q&As with Christine and I, and sometimes with our guests, where we answer your personal questions and go deeper into the topics that matter most to you. Plus, you'll hear the bonus content that we have with our guests, extra conversations, and insights you won't find anywhere else.
If you are craving that connection, more support, and more depth, then we want you to join us. Head over to patreon.com/Modern Ancestral Mamas and come be a part of the community. Welcome to Modern Ancestral Mamas. We are Corey and Christine, two millennial moms on a mission to bring ancestral wisdom to modern motherhood. Today's episode is going to be quite a treat for our Ma'am listeners, so make sure to grab a mug of broth, a cup of coffee, maybe some tea. Sit down and listen because you're not going to want to miss a single word of this interview. Last fall, I had the privilege of hearing our guest speak in person at an event, and I was completely blown away by his presentation and have been following his writings and work ever since. So today we are honored to interview Dr. Kheriaty, a physician specializing in psychiatry and currently a scholar and the director of the program in bioethics and American democracy at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Oof, that's a mouthful. Welcome, Dr. Kheriaty.
Thanks, Christine. It's great to be with you and Corey.
Awesome.
Okay, so we start the episode with the roundtable question. So we'll all take a second to answer it. You can answer it as long form as you want to. It doesn't have to be super in depth. Doesn't really matter. However you feel like answering it is fine. So the question for today is, in your opinion, what do you believe constitutes true health? Anybody can go first.
And as an aside, do you think you've ever seen it?
I don't know.
Christine, why don't you go first?
Yeah.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, why don't you go first, Christine?
What do I think constitutes true health? Okay. I think true health is an individual who is fully connected with his community, in relationship with people. I do think a healthy body is a part of it. Physically well, both mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. But I think most of it has to do with the relationship with the community. I don't know. Those are my amateur thoughts.
So have you ever seen it?
No, I don't think I've ever seen it.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, it's an ideal that we aim toward, but probably never fully achieve. And you can find people that get much closer than others. So, a healthy, well-working body of an Olympic athlete, one of the reasons I think we admire a body that can operate and function at that level is because it's such a rarity. Um, Watching someone set a pole vaulting record, which happened a week or two ago. Again, I forget the guy's name, but just watching that sort of magical dance in motion, and you see these sort of astonishing well working of this young man's body as he does this extraordinarily difficult thing that looks almost impossible, would be probably an exemplary example of physical health. And maybe he has medical issues that I don't even know about. But at least when it comes to athleticism, I think one of the reasons we're so drawn to competitive sports is we can see the beauty of the well-working human organism in motion. And it's an ideal that all of us, I think, would want, even those of us who are sort of couch potatoes and couldn't dream of getting to that point. I do worry a little bit about definitions of health that are so expansive, like the World Health Organization's definition of health. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along the lines of like total physical, mental, social, spiritual well-being. It's so expansive that no one can ever really achieve it. But also, if you define health in that way, there is a danger of empowering healthcare providers to have too much control, essentially, right? If our job is to make sure that you are flourishing in every respect, then there's a danger of medicalizing aspects of ordinary life that people should probably take care of on their own. So it's a little bit of a tricky question in terms of how you're using the answer and what you're using the answer for. But human beings certainly are social animals. And so I think an integration into a community, into a family, is absolutely an important part of physical and mental health. One of the worst things that we can do to a person, one of the worst forms of torture, is to place them in solitary confinement. Right? It not only does the body waste away, but the mind begins to come unglued as well. So we are hardwired to connect with other people. We're built to live in deep and meaningful relationships with other people, starting with family and then friends and then neighbors and local communities and on out from there. So I like the fact that you mentioned the sort of relational community aspect of health, because I also don't think that health is something that can be achieved entirely on your own, right? If you're not living in a society that promotes health, a society that makes healthy food available, a society that makes clean water available, a society that makes the living conditions in the environment at least as non-toxic as reasonably possible. It's going to be hard, no matter how hard you're working on your own health. It's going to be hard to achieve a really robust level of health, without help from a healthy community.
What do you think, Corey?
I was just going to answer that I don't think true health is possible this side of glory. That's all. That's my answer.
Yeah. I mean, because even if somebody is, let's just say, the epitome of health physically, maybe emotionally as well, there's always death to contend with.
That's right.
Well, yeah, I don't know that I think death is necessarily a bad thing. I'm just like, I just don't like your example of the Olympic athlete. I've had conversations with Olympic athletes who have, are just like, you would know who they are because they are hugely, famous athletes and they're incredibly physically healthy, but they had terrible family lives or, and all of that is then connected. And I've one particularly that I had a personal conversation with, like, I know she, I'm not gonna name who it is because that would just not be an okay thing to do. But like, she was post her athletic career, and she was kind of like still very, very physically fit, but not in a place spiritually or, relationally, that she just wasn't in a good, healthy place that way. And it was messing with her mentally, So, I mean, yeah, like you said, like, if we have to involve all of those pieces, which I think you do, I just don't think it's possible in our fallen world.
The only caveat are the anthropologists that we know that have studied the indigenous cultures. And that's why I say death, because while they might appear to be in perfect health in these last remaining few indigenous cultures that still exist, they still have to contend with death. So that's the only reason why I mentioned that. And probably because it was on my mind reading the book.
Well, and every ailment, every illness, every broken bone, every disease that we acquire is a reminder of our mortality. That even if my body is well working now, it's not going to be that way forever. Even if I break my arm and it's going to heal in 6 weeks, that's a reminder of my frailty, my fragility, and it's a subtle sort of indication that eventually my body is going to break down to the point where I'm going to have to face my own mortality. And so death is the kind of horizon against which we practice medicine. And we're always reminded of it, at least implicitly, whenever we're dealing with illness, especially serious illness, but even minor forms of illness, I think, are subtle reminders that we're not going to live forever. And despite whatever advances we've made in modern medicine, the human mortality rate continues to hold steady at 100%, which is one of the reasons I think that medicine should not see death as the last enemy to be conquered, right? And there are various ideologies out there now, from transhumanism to just radical life extension,
biohacking,
scientific projects, biohacking. Let's turn us into cyborgs so that the parts that start breaking down can be replaced ad nauseum. And this desire to live forever. First of all, I think it's a religious desire. I think it's a transhumanism is a sort of counterfeit religion for a secular age, but it's attempting to promise eternal life that through, not through grace, but through science and technology, we can somehow figure out how to beat death. And I think that's a dangerous project to embark on.
Yeah. Corey and I have talked about this often, about how we feel that in the health and wellness space, especially the crunchy health and wellness space, which we are deeply entrenched in, it can turn into a religion. People often see it so dogmatically and follow it that way. And so you have to just remind yourself that it's not the end all be all.
Yeah, I like to say that, health is certainly an important human good, but it's not the highest human good. I think it's more important to be a morally virtuous person than to be a healthy person. I think it's more important to be a self-sacrificing and loving person than it is to be a healthy person. That's not to denigrate health, but some people do arrange their lives in a kind of obsessionally pharisaical way. Nothing unclean will ever enter my body. It would be some sort of egregious sin to eat an Oreo cookie. And while the desire obviously to eat healthy foods, to get away from the sort of toxic industrialized food sourcing that's creating huge problems for us. I'm all in favor of the project to create food that's actually suitable for human beings. I'm not advocating for Oreo cookies, but I'm saying it is possible to arrange your life around that lower good to the point where you sacrifice higher goods for the sake of pursuing health. And I think that's a mistake, right? If your friend bakes you something, for your birthday that has something in it that you might not have chosen to cook with yourself, to show your gratitude and your charity toward your friend, I think it's more important maybe to eat what they've given you than to say, no, this has a few drops of yellow number 5 in it, and so I'm just not, I can't. I'm sorry. It's a beautiful cake that you made me, but I'm gonna go eat a gluten-free something instead.
Corey and I talk about this often. This is definitely a hot topic of conversation.
I love that. Okay, I do want to give listeners a little bit of human context around you. Yes. So could you tell us, I know you said you have 5 boys or 5 kids. Did you say 5 boys or 5
All
kids?
boys, yeah.
Ooh.
Oh, man. Okay, so how old are they?
So I married my high school sweetheart right before I started medical school. And we dated long distance, met in high school, dated long distance in college, got married, and then went to med school. And the oldest son is 24, and he's married and has a 10-month-old baby girl. So I'm actually a grandmother. I became a father at 24, and he became a father at 24. So I'm on the young side for being a grandfather. But it's really wonderful since we had 5 boys that now we have a little girl in the family. And so I have another in college. I have another in trade school. I have another sophomore in high school, and then I have an 8th grader. So 24 on down to age 13 with two of the boys still at home. Wow. So yeah, my wife is a saint, as you can imagine.
My oldest is an 8th grader, and man, I am like I have one son, and he's in 8th grade, and it is like a time in our lives.
Yeah, you've got. You've got a couple of years before he's driving. It does get easier when the family has an additional driver, I will say.
I actually think
a turning point.
Now that he's old enough to watch his younger siblings, it's like a huge. I mean, my husband and I can go on a date night. It's enormous.
Yeah,
we don't have to pay a babysitter $25 an hour.
Yep.
Totally. Don't tell him that's what babysitters can get, because I haven't paid.
Because he'll jump ship and go find other babysitting jobs.
Yeah, right. He'll go really babysit. He won't watch his siblings. All right. So the other part that we would love for you to give us is a brief like backstory on kind of how you got to where you are.
Sure.
Because if you obviously went to medical school. Did you go to a conventional medical school? And then what happened?
So I went to Georgetown Medical School, which I would say is definitely a conventional medical school. It's a medical school that focuses a lot on surgical specialties. Orthopedic surgery is big there. That was never my bent. I didn't know what specialty I would choose when I went to medical school. I was kind of open to anything. But doing my psychiatry clerkship as a 3rd year really sort of grabbed my attention, and I fell in love with psychiatry. And I was never the kid with a stethoscope in his crib, and other family members that were doctors, and sort of knew from a young age that I wanted to be a doctor. I had a lot of different interests. I thought about medicine, when I was in high school. I had friends who told me, I think you'd be a good physician. You should think about it. Always liked science. But I thought actually about going to graduate school in philosophy after I discovered my love for philosophy. And my then fiance, now wife, Jennifer, suggested in college, well, if you do philosophy, you're only going to do philosophy. You're going to have to get an academic job wherever you happen to, land a tenure track position, and that's where we're going to live. Whereas medicine will give you a lot more flexibility. We can choose where we want to live, and you could do both. You could do medicine and medical ethics and bring in your background in philosophy to sort of thinking through, ethical issues in medicine. That was really good advice because that's exactly sort of the trajectory that my career took. So in college, I said, I'm going to apply to med school. If I get in, I will go, which is sort of a weird way to choose a career. But I got into a couple of good schools, and we liked Georgetown. We liked the DC area. And so that's where I landed. I did my psychiatry residency training at the University of California, Irvine. So I moved to Southern California, where my wife grew up, to do residency, and then stayed on there as a faculty member when I finished residency. I was there for 16 years. I was a full professor in the School of Medicine, and I was director of the medical ethics program by the time I left the university in 2021, was it, I guess. So the story of that, I was enjoying myself there. I was doing about half my time in psychiatry, teaching residents and medical students, seeing patients in the inpatient and outpatient psychiatry units and clinics, consulting in the main hospital for people that needed psychiatric consults, having a great time. And then the other half of my time, I was chairing the ethics committee and teaching the required ethics course to medical students and doing work in medical ethics. And I thought, I'm going to retire here. There'll be a nice pension, and this is a good deal, and I get to teach, and it's great. And then COVID hit, and I was placed on a committee at the UC Office of the President. So I was at UC Irvine, but the Office of the President oversaw all the UC branch campuses that had hospitals. There's 5 of them, like UCLA, UC San Diego, UC San Francisco, UCI, and so forth. And we were developing all the COVID policies and vetting them, including some ethically sensitive policies, like what happens if we run out of ventilators? How do we triage when there's a scarce resource? What that never happened, but we had a policy in case that happened. How to allocate scarce resources, like monoclonal antibodies were scarce initially during COVID, so we developed a policy for that. And then the vaccine mandate policy came down from on high, and our committee that had vetted all the other COVID policies wasn't involved in that policy at all. And I thought that was very strange, because it was clear to me that of all the policies that we developed, this is definitely going to be the most ethically controversial and publicly controversial. So why aren't we talking about it? And I was very disturbed by that. So I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal, co-authored with a Notre Dame law professor, Jerry Bradley, called Why University Vaccine Mandates Are Unethical. And I focused on universities because they were the first institutions to institute mandates. Before businesses were doing it, before the government was doing it, they road tested it, they field tested it at universities. And then I passed that article around the UC Office of the President in our committee there, and said, "Hey, can we talk about this?" And it was radio silence and kind of stonewalling. And no, we're not going to discuss this. So at that point, I had gone public with my position, and at the time, it was early in the vaccine rollout. I didn't have as many concerns about safety and efficacy of the vaccines as I have now. So my primary argument was not about safety and efficacy. Those concerns developed later for me. But at the time, it was just purely an ethical question of informed consent. Mm-hmm. So this doctrine of informed consent says that an adult of sound mind has the right, after being given adequate information on risks, benefits, and alternatives, to either accept or decline a proposed medical intervention. And this is basic bioethics 101. I taught the principle of informed consent in lecture 2 of the required ethics course to the first and second year medical students. And I talked about the Nuremberg Code and the Nazi atrocities, and the first principle of the Nuremberg Code, which is meant to prevent those kinds of abuses from ever happening again, the abuses of the Nazi doctors and the death camps. the first principle articulated in the Nuremberg Code is the principle of informed consent. So people at the time were making an argument, well, even if you're young and healthy and not likely to be harmed by COVID, you should do it for the sake of others, which is an interesting argument until you actually look at the data on these mRNA vaccines and realize it was clear early on for anyone who cared to look that they don't stop infection in transmission. So the whole argument, get it for the sake of others, to me was extremely weak and kind of fell apart, at least for these products that didn't have the ability necessarily to protect other people. And furthermore, if you truly believe that the vaccine works and you get the vaccine, then you should be protected anyway. So why do you need to force it on other people that may have legitimate reasons for wanting to decline? Mm-hmm. So what happened was, because I had gone public, people started reaching out to me, nurses that I had worked on the front lines with every day during the pandemic, saying, I'm going to lose my job because I have concerns about these vaccines and the rapidity of their development. And I don't know if I trust them. I had students reaching out to me saying, I'm going to lose my scholarship and get kicked out of school. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I just got to the point where I was projecting ahead 3 months to when the annual ethics course was going to start. And I just couldn't imagine myself getting up in front of the students and talking about informed consent and talking about moral courage and doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, even when it might cost you something. I just couldn't imagine doing that in good conscience if I hadn't actually tried to change the policy. And maybe if I wasn't director of medical ethics, I wouldn't have taken this step, but I just felt in my position, like nobody else is going to try to do this. I need to try to do this. So I took the fateful step of challenging the vaccine mandate in federal court on behalf of people like me who had natural immunity and had recovered from COVID. I thought other people should have the right to decline the vaccine as well, but that was a legal case that for various legal reasons, I thought we would be able to prevail on. So that was the nature of the case that I filed. It didn't end up winning that case, unfortunately, although if I filed it today, I probably would win under a new Ninth Circuit court precedent that appeared about a year and a half after my case. And I like to tell people, if you want to go sideways with your employer really quickly, a good way to do that is to sue them in federal court. It's very effective, very efficient. So immediately after I filed the lawsuit and the judge declined my request for a preliminary injunction, the university placed me first on what they called investigatory leave, then on unpaid suspension, and a month later, and then a month after that, they fired me. So they ran me through the paces of how to fire a full professor as quickly as possible for alleged noncompliance with the same policy that I was challenging in federal court. And they fired me before the court made a final ruling in my case too, by the way, which was kind of interesting. They didn't even wait for the court to make a ruling. So I found myself out of a job. I scrambled to put together a private practice so I could see. I was doing about 15 hours a week at that time of seeing my own patients. And so I had to sort of figure out how to set something up so I could continue seeing my patients. And then some independent think tanks like the Brownstone Institute and the Ethics and Public Policy Center reached out and said, hey, we actually appreciate what you did. And we'd like you to come work for us. And so fortunately, I was rescued by the Independent Research Institute world. And it's actually been great since then. It was a surreal experience, let me tell you. I got fired in December of that year. And then a few weeks later, in January of that year, I'm standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial with Robert Malone and RFK Jr. and Peter McCullough and all these, Pierre Corey and all these sort of COVID medical dissidents that I was meeting and getting to know for a Defeat the Mandates rally. It was freezing cold, like 20 degrees outside, but 40,000 people coming out in the freezing cold. And I'm up there standing at the podium, giving a talk to this enormous crowd and just wondering, like, what am I doing here? What what just happened to me? I look down to my right. There's a marble plaque on the steps right next to the podium that says 1964, Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream speech, right? Standing right here. So it was just surreal looking over the mall on Washington, D.C. at this huge crowd of people. And then the next day I testified at Senator Ron Johnson's Senate hearing. So I very quickly got sort of caught up in this burgeoning medical freedom movement, I guess you would call it, and met some really wonderful and brave people, people who were very good to me. I have to give a shout out to my boss at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Ryan Anderson, who, as soon as I was fired, wrote a piece in Newsweek saying, I have an autoimmune condition. I consulted with my physician. I weighed the pros and cons. I decided personally to get the COVID vaccine. Aaron made a different decision, but I fully support his decision. I fully support the idea of informed consent. And even though we made a different decision on the vaccine, I'm fully behind him. Published that piece in Newsweek and then brought me on board to work at the Ethics and Public Policy Center that he ran. So fortunately, there were some good people who sort of helped me get my footing again and continue my work. And ironically, even though I do miss the students, I miss the teaching, I miss the residents. Ironically, I've been a lot more productive in my research and my writing and my public policy work since I left the university. When I was at the university, I published one book and co-authored another book in the course of 16 years. Since I left the university, I've published 2 books, and I have 2 more book contracts for books that will be published next year. So 4 books in 4 years. So it's actually freed me up a lot to do one of the things that I absolutely love that I didn't, just with all my other duties at the university, I didn't have that much time for. So, God's providence was at work there. The other person I have to give a shout out to is my wife, Jennifer, because there was a point where, and by the way, the university was kind of almost begging me to submit a religious exemption, which they almost certainly would have granted. But that would have removed my standing to bring the case to challenge the policy as a whole. And I decided at one point, I don't want to just save my own skin. I want to also take care of the other people who are getting fired under this policy. That may not qualify for a religious exemption or may not qualify for a medical exemption. But it was about a week before I knew, like, if I don't do this by Monday, I'm going to be out of a job. And I had 5 kids at home at the time. Some of them are sort of off the payroll now, but at the time they were all on the payroll. And I was almost the sole breadwinner. My wife was working 1 day a week at the kids' elementary school, but most of the income and support from the family was coming from my job. So, I had a duty to also take care of my family. And I didn't really have a plan B about what to do after I left. I knew no hospital was going to hire me. It's going to have to be something in the private practice world because, healthcare institutions are not going to hire someone that just sued his previous employer.
Fair.
And so I was talking to Jennifer about this and kind of, maybe I should just submit a religious exemption. Maybe this is not a responsible thing to do as a father. And to her credit, she didn't tell me what to do. The only thing she said was, your case now is very public, which is true. It's been in the newspaper. People were watching, my following on social media was growing. People were looking to this case. And she said, a lot of people are looking at what's going to happen here. And I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I think you should strongly consider finishing what you started. And that's all I needed. Immediately I knew, yes, of course, I'm going to stay the course and I'm going to pursue this lawsuit. So anyway, that was the first lawsuit I filed. I've since been involved in 2 other interesting lawsuits related to free speech. I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I'm happy to tell you about those cases as well, because they also have to do with issues related to medical freedom.
If you love Modern Ancestral Mamas, we want to invite you to come a little closer. We've officially opened our Modern Ancestral Mamas Patreon community. And this isn't just about bonus content, it's about connection.
This is a space for mamas who are questioning modern norms, reclaiming ancestral wisdom, and wanting to have real, honest conversations without judgment. Inside this community, you'll connect with like-minded women, dive deeper into the topics we cover on the podcast, and get access to exclusive bonus episode content, discussions, and behind-the-scenes conversations with Christine and I.
Patreon is where the podcast becomes a circle, kind of like a little circle of trust, a place to ask questions, share wins, process challenges, and remember that moms, you are not doing this alone. If Modern Ancestral Mamas has ever made you feel seen or supported or inspired, and we've heard from so many of you in the comment section of our podcast that it has, then please join us on Patreon and become part of the community we've been building all along.
You can find the link in the show notes, and we'd love to welcome you in. You can also just go straight to patreon.com/Modern Ancestral Mamas.
What do you think, Corey? Should we continue down that train or pivot?
My internet is going a little bit spotty, so you're going to have to
Yeah. Okay. No worries.
lead a little bit.
Okay. Erin, oh man, as much as I want to hear about those other 2 lawsuits, I do know that our listeners have very valuable questions
Yeah.
to ask you. So I'm wondering if we can put a pin on one of the things that you said, which is submitting the religious exemption.
Yeah.
And transition over a little bit to talking about the ethics behind vaccines. Just to give you a little background, in the health and wellness space, in the very uber crunchy space, we get often labeled as anti-vaxxers, which I think I would prefer to say that we are just moms who have done our own research and have read the ingredients in these vaccines and come to different conclusions.
Yeah, sure.
So
Anti-vax is meant to be an epithet that silences you. It's not meant to be an actual descriptive term. So when people ask me if I'm anti-vax, my response is, your question doesn't make any sense. It's like asking a physician, are you pro-medication or anti-medication? Well, the answer is, which medication, for which patient, under what circumstances? And there's no such thing as being pro-medication or anti-medication. You have to take these things on a case-by-case basis. Not all vaccines are the same. Not all medications are the same. Not all patients are the same. Not all adjuvants added to vaccines are the same. Not all combinations of vaccines are the same. So it's a stupid term and it's a stupid question as far as I'm concerned. And it's not meant to actually elucidate information about you. It's meant to insult you and to shut you up and to turn off your faculty of critical thinking. So let me just talk a little bit, because I imagine you've had other guests that talk about some of the problems with the vaccines themselves and some of the safety concerns about vaccines themselves. And I'm happy to get into that. But my own area of expertise in ethics and public policy, I like to frame the problem with vaccines in terms of the way in which the whole regulatory scheme around vaccines has set us up for trouble and set us up for harm and set us up so that people who are vaccine injured have no recourse. And by the way, many people who are vaccine injured also get labeled with the anti-vax slur, which is idiotic, because if they were anti-vax, they wouldn't have taken the vaccine that injured them in the first place. So please stop with this nonsense. I'm sorry, I get a little bit worked up on that whole subject of vaccine injured people. But what we have chosen to do in this country is to treat vaccines differently than we treat all other biologics, all other medications, for example. And you're probably aware of this, but just in case some of your or your listeners are not, we know that Congress under the Reagan administration basically gave vaccine companies total immunity for any harm done by their product. And I like to explain to people, actually, big bad pharma, for all its faults, is very good at certain things, and they actually know how to run good clinical trials. But they will only run good safety trials and good clinical trials if they're forced to by the American people and by the regulatory agencies. The reason that Pfizer, if it develops a new drug for rheumatoid arthritis, the reason they're going to do a good safety study on it, one that we can have reasonable degree of confidence in, is because if they miss something because they do a shoddy safety study and then people are harmed, those people can sue them. Mm-hmm. So you may not be old enough to remember the Vioxx scandal. This is a medication, there's a pain medication given for rheumatoid arthritis, where basically it ended up causing rare but severe cardiac side effects in many patients. And this was a side effect that should have been apparent from the safety testing, and it was buried. And there were multi-billion-dollar lawsuits against, I can't remember who the manufacturer of Vioxx was. It might have been Pfizer, but don't quote me on that. But in any case, the pharmaceutical company was sued for many billions of dollars. The drug was taken off the market, and it was a disaster. And pharma companies will try to avoid those disasters if they know that they're liable. This is a basic mechanism of consumer protection in the United States. So the analogy I like to use is, let's suppose Congress decides tomorrow that automobile manufacturers, Ford and Toyota, are liable for safety issues on all their cars, and you can sue them if their car blows up in a fender bender. But they're not liable for their minivans. How many people would go out and continue to buy minivans, right? Does it automatically mean those minivans are unsafe? No, but now we have reason to believe that they might cut corners, that they might not be as diligent, right? If it's not going to cost them anything, if there are safety problems. So that's a major issue that needs to be corrected. And what I like to say is, if I only had one policy change that I could make to the vaccine landscape, well, actually there are two. But the first one would be remove liability protections, make the companies just as liable for their vaccines as they are for all their other biologic products, including medications, and the lawyers will take care of the rest. And we will get safer vaccines. That's a very serious issue. The second issue goes back to what I was talking about before, which is informed consent. Yeah. And I am firmly convinced that no vaccine, no medication should ever be forced on anyone, right? So at the very least, I mean, I would rather have an opt-in than an opt-out system. But now we have this sort of opt-out system where you have to get a religious exemption or a medical exemption. I think every state should also have simply conscience-based exemptions, because, you may not have religious reasons why you don't want the vaccine. You may not have even medical reasons why you don't want the vaccine. You may have other reasons, and those reasons may be perfectly legitimate. And so people need to be able to opt out. Many states, like my own state of California, has made it virtually impossible even to get appropriate medical exemptions to vaccines, which is another very, very serious issue. Because essentially what they did is it's almost like they're doxing any physician. There's a database where if a physician writes more than 5 medical exemptions, his name is put on a database that is searchable by the public, saying that he is under investigation for potentially bad medical practice. Yeah. And there's like 10,000 doctors or something now on that list in the state of California, a huge number of doctors. And they're never going to go through that list and clear all those doctors' names, and investigate whether or not supposedly they were going to investigate whether or not those medical exemptions were quote unquote appropriate according to whatever the Department of Public Health deems appropriate. But they're not even going to do that. So your name just stays up there forever. And it's a black mark on your professional reputation, which is really all a physician has. I mean, that's a physician's most valuable asset, is that my current and future patients trust me. And, if they do a medical board search and see that, I'm under investigation, that makes me look bad. So that has scared virtually every physician in California away from writing medical exemptions. I got a letter during COVID, a threatening letter from the medical board saying if you write any inappropriate exemptions for the COVID vaccine, you could be subjected to investigation and discipline by the medical board. Now, the letter never stated what would constitute an appropriate or inappropriate reason to write an exemption, right? So it's just this, and by design, doctors don't know how to interpret that or what that means. But to threaten a doctor's medical license is even worse than what happened to me. I lost my job, but I can still practice medicine in California in private practice. But if I lose my medical license, I can't practice medicine in California. It would even be hard to get a medical license in another state because I have to go to the other state and explain why I lost my medical license in my home state, right? And so that's a career killer for people. So essentially the vaccine, the universal vaccination fanatics in states like California, New York, and many other places have so squeezed things down that you can't get a medical exemption. It's actually easier to get a religious exemption because free exercise of religion is a constitutionally protected First Amendment right, which means if you take them to court, the court has to apply what they call a strict scrutiny analysis. They have the state has to have a higher threshold that they have to establish to say why they are violating your deeply held religious convictions. So actually the easiest way to get an exemption in most states is to get a religious exemption for vaccines. And, but, I think this whole current setup of the way in which vaccines are forced upon people on pain of basically not being able to go to a public or private school in your home state, essentially being forced to homeschool, is a total violation of people's rights of their bodily integrity. And it props up an essentially corrupt system that doesn't have adequate safety mechanisms in place to ensure that people are not harmed by these products. So it's a sort of perfect storm where people who are harmed have no recourse. The federal government set up a system years ago when they immunized companies against all liability for vaccines. Simultaneously, they set up this vaccine injury program. And essentially how it works is if you believe your kid was harmed by a vaccine, they'll come knock on your door. They'll offer you a certain amount of money, probably not enough to take care of your totally disabled kid for the rest of his life, but I don't know, $100,000 or whatever the going rate is today. And then they'll make you sign a non-disclosure agreement saying you will never even suggest the possibility that your child was injured by a vaccine. Now, why would we have to ask people to do that? Right? That to me is very troubling. Yeah. We're going to try to pay you off because this product injured your kid. And to get a little bit of help to care for your now injured and disabled child, we're going to force silence upon you. And we're going to threaten to arrest you, essentially, if you ever hint that your child was injured by a vaccine. There's something fundamentally wrong with this system. Bracket all the debates about vaccine safety and efficacy, and just look at that regulatory framework. There's something wrong here, something deeply, deeply wrong here.
Yeah.
Ethics.
Can we talk about,
And by the way, no one who's been injured by the COVID vaccine has received a payout from that federal system yet.
Still.
As far as I know, last time I checked.
Oh my gosh.
And maybe that's changed in recent months, but for all the vaccine injuries that we've seen with the mRNA vaccines, the federal government is not offering compensation. So I think it would bankrupt the federal government because there's just too many people who have been harmed.
Yeah.
Actually. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt there, but I did want to make that point that even that totally inadequate system of redress is not being utilized for the largest vaccine rollout and probably the most dangerous vaccine ever rolled out in history.
Yeah. What were you going to ask, Corey?
I just want to get into the ethics of vaccines in general, not just the programs, but or however you want to look at it. Like, what are the ethics surrounding how they're made, how they get to market, whatever.
Especially for listeners who are maybe pro-life Christians or pro-life Catholics. What would you say to those individuals?
Yeah, so thank you for asking about this, because there are ethical issues with the way in which vaccines are manufactured that have to do with using aborted fetal cell lines, so tissue from aborted fetuses. And the reason why they want to use tissue from aborted fetuses is that a fetus in utero has not yet been exposed in the outside world to viruses and bacteria and other pathogens that can essentially make the tissue less pure and have, the cell lines that you're using to develop vaccines, you don't want small fragments of other viruses in those cell lines. So they use fetal tissue for a particular reason, but they take it obviously from an aborted fetus. They take it and use it either sometimes for manufacturing the vaccine itself or for testing the vaccine. I'm a Roman Catholic. I'll speak about the Catholic perspective on this. What the Vatican has said is that the connection to abortion and the connection to the fetal cell lines in certain circumstances is sufficiently remote that a Catholic could in good conscience still take one of these products if there are no ethically alternative available products and there's serious reasons to take it. So it's kind of a nuanced position. But the other thing that the Vatican said that has been universally ignored is that Catholics and other people who are pro-life need to, at the same time, make noise and demand more ethically acceptable products. In other words, if right now there's a pandemic and this is the only thing that's going to save your life, and this, and by the way, in the case of the COVID vaccines, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was manufactured with fetal cell line tissues, and the mRNA vaccines were not manufactured with that, but they were tested on it. So it was involved in testing. And so to me, that's a legitimate reason for a religious or conscience-based objection to these vaccines for anyone who's concerned about, caring for human life in its earliest stage of development and not taking tissue from a fetus who can't consent, and all the other problems with that.
And maybe this is down in the weeds a little bit, but like, how are they getting these aborted fetuses? Like, are they telling the mothers that this is what's going to happen? When you get an abortion, do you just sign away whatever?
There are 3 or 4 fetal tissue cell lines that have been kept alive literally for decades that were taken from aborted fetuses, I think all the way back in the 1970s. So once you develop these cell lines, you can actually keep growing them in Petri dishes. And the ones, as far as I understand, the ones that are most commonly and most currently in use are actually very old. Don't quote me on this. It's been a while since I read sort of the origin story of these, but I believe at least in one case, the mother was not informed that the fetal tissue would be taken and used for this purpose. So it's possible that there was no even proxy consent on the part of the mother. So the thing that I don't see happening, and the thing that I would like to see happening, is for people to say, no, this is not acceptable. We need morally and ethically acceptable alternatives. And there are some alternatives available. For example, I believe it's a measles vaccine that's available in Japan, that's separated out from, there's been a lot of talk about, should we separate MMR and take them individually by combining them? Are we, enhancing certain risks and so forth? But there's a measles vaccine that's available in Japan. So it is manufactured and distributed, that has no connection to fetal cell lines and no connection to abortion. But it's not commercially available here in the United States. You have to actually fly to Japan to get it, for your kid, if that's what you want. So there's absolutely no reason why already available products that are more ethically acceptable couldn't be made available here. But that's going to require that people demand them. And that's just something that I don't see happening. And I was sort of disappointed in, my fellow Catholics during the pandemic, that most people were just very quick to give a blessing to the mRNA vaccines and say, no, it's okay. The Vatican said it's okay. You could take this. You're doing it for, the common good. But no one followed that up with the second point, which is, actually, we don't like these, and we might hold our nose and take them, but we need to develop products that don't have these issues associated with them. And I never heard that message from Catholic leaders and from other pro-life leaders. So to me, that's a very serious problem.
Yeah, I feel like that is a deep, dark rabbit hole, because you're going up against the Vatican.
Well, in a sense, yes, but in a sense, no. I mean, the Vatican doesn't say that you have to take these products. It just says it's permissible to take the products. And, to give the Vatican a little bit of credit, the Vatican has also said you should demand morally more acceptable products. Okay. And, this teaching came from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. It, didn't come directly from the Pope. It's nuanced. It could be changed in the future. It's not, it's not an infallibly defined Catholic dogma, but it's the Church's current kind of weighing in on the question of the day. My own view is actually more restrictive than the Vatican's view. I think it's really hard to justify using products that have any connection to fetal cell lines. I just don't want to be cooperative with the abortion industry in any way, shape, or form. And I think unless people absolutely just say no to these products, we're probably, at a practical level, not going to get more ethically acceptable products. I mean, pharmaceutical companies will respond to public pressure. If there's, it's the law of supply and demand. And if they perceive there is a real demand, like 20% of the people out there consider themselves strongly pro-life, and they don't want this, but if we gave them that, then they would take that. They would manufacture that other thing. They would. I mean, they respond to market pressures. The problem is we haven't collectively placed those kinds of market pressures on these companies yet, and so they haven't responded.
I mean, I feel like, yeah. What were you going to say, Corey?
It's never really been something that is talked about widely throughout the pro-life community.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, I remember hearing about it when I was in high school. And I just remember being like, well, there's nothing we can do about it, and to be, fully transparent, I'm not Catholic. I'm like evangelical, but I'm very pro-life. And it's never something that comes up in the pro-life conversations with evangelicals ever.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think
it's just something we're not talking about.
Yeah. I mean, the other beast that we have to contend with is the propaganda from the government and from
that's right.
medical schools and from media and things like that. And so if we are being told that something will happen to our children, or something will happen to another child or grandparent if we don't use these products, then I think the majority of the public is going to listen to those authorities.
It's been very effective so far. I mean, the propaganda around vaccines has been probably the most successful propaganda effort in United States history. I would say even more successful than wartime propaganda, which can become very powerful. And, but the pressures exerted on people to take products that they may or may not want is just astonishing. And the labeling of you as essentially a bad person that doesn't care about others, if you raise any questions about this, is seriously problematic. You're not, anytime you're not allowed to ask questions, that worries me. There's a 20th century political theorist named Eric Voegelin, and Voegelin studied the totalitarian systems of the 20th century. He looked at, Soviet communism, Italian fascism, German Nazism. And he said, what do all of these totalitarian systems have in common? They have different ideologies, right? They fought each other in World War II, the Soviets and the Nazis. So they're not exactly the same, but what are the common features? And he said, well, the common features are not actually concentration camps and barbed wire fences and, men in jackboots and secret police and mass surveillance, as horrifying as all those things are. He said, the common feature of all totalitarian systems is the prohibition of questions. The regime, the ideology monopolizes what counts as rationality, what counts as science, what counts as what you're allowed to say in polite conversation. And if you raise your hand and ask any inconvenient questions, they don't sit down and debate with you. Oh, that's an interesting question. Yeah, let's talk about, why you don't think the Aryan race is superior to the Jewish race. Let's have a debate about that. The Nazi doesn't do that, right? They just steamroll you. They shut you up. They place you outside the realm of polite conversation. And if that doesn't work, then they'll put you in the concentration camp to shut you up. So anytime you're not allowed to ask questions, I get very, very worried. What? Isn't it true that none of these vaccines on the CDC schedule for children have ever actually been tested in combination with any of the other vaccines? Shut up, science denier. That's the only response you're going to get, right?
This actually brings up a very good point that I was hoping that maybe you could discuss, which is, so you wrote the book, Making the Cut, which is a little bit of a insight into medical schools and how they work and things like that. At what point do you think patients became or were suddenly unable to ask questions of their physicians? I mean, Corey and I are thinking, average mom goes in for a well check with her child. She obviously has valid questions. Maybe she's slightly nervous and wants to ask a few about the vaccines. Maybe it's not vaccines, maybe it's something else. And she's basically dismissed.
Yeah.
And
I think that started in the 1980s with a Vaccine Injury Act that indemnified companies against liability. And it's grown from there. It certainly took a quantum leap during COVID. I mean, during COVID, you were not allowed to ask questions, as many people noticed. Even sensible questions. Shut up, you're not an epidemiologist. Shut up, you're not a virologist. Well, look,
right.
I used to tell people during COVID, okay, you may not be an epidemiologist, but you're a person with rationality and logic and common sense, and you shouldn't outsource your rationality, your logic, your common sense to the so-called experts who are saying things that just don't make any sense. So you don't have to be a virologist to know that a policy that says when I walk into a restaurant and I'm standing at the door of the restaurant, I have to be wearing my mask. But as soon as I sit down in the restaurant and my server comes, I can take my mask off. You don't have to be a virologist to know that that policy is totally insane and makes no sense and is, kabuki theater rather than, public health. But the censorship of the propaganda was very powerful during COVID and cowed a lot of people into silence. And my previous book was sort of all about this. Shameless plug for my other book here, but it's called The New Abnormal: The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. And it's about not only what happened to us in COVID, but how those mechanisms are going to be used in the future. What was put in place during that time, and what can we expect from that down the road?
Yeah, some of your history on that book is very dark.
Yeah, that book's, you encouraged the listeners to sit down with a cup of tea. I think if you're going to read The New Abnormal, you need probably some
Something
single malt,
stronger.
Yeah,
single malt scotch,
yeah, totally.
double. It's a stiff
I
drink.
agree with that for sure. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
It's a sobering book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually want to go back a little bit, and I want to ask about the ethics of vaccines for the greater good. You
Yeah.
know, so if I'm the person who's maybe not convinced about the arguments around the pro-life movement, or I don't know, for whatever reasons, like, is there a conversation to be had about the ethics of vaccinating your family for, the weaker ones in our society?
Yeah. That's a
Or
great question.
the kids that are in public school
Yeah.
or whatever.
And it's important to, give the devil his due. So I'm going to make the strongest case I can make for the people I disagree with on this whole question. So I think the strongest case that they can make is, first of all, and all of this, by the way, is premised on the idea that we have sterilizing vaccines that in almost every case stop infection in transmission, and that those vaccines are safe and effective. And I'm not actually willing to grant those premises, but for the sake of a theoretical argument about vaccines, let's grant those premises and let's make the strongest case, and then let's see what we could say about that. So with those assumptions in place, you could say, all right, to stop the spread of measles, we need a certain level of herd immunity, which is either people who have recovered from measles, which we'd rather not have people go through that and risk, dying or, getting seriously sick, or they have to be vaccinated against measles. And this only works if a certain threshold, a certain number of the population does it. If the vaccination rates fall below a certain threshold, you start getting measles outbreaks. Now, you might say, well, I'm willing to take that risk for myself or for my children, but there are some people that are immunocompromised that can't take vaccines because they're immunocompromised. And so to try to protect those immunocompromised people, other people who have healthy kids should vaccinate them whenever possible, right? Because that's an act of love. It's an act of charity for these other kids who, because they have cancer, because they have some immune system dysregulation, they're not able to take a vaccine, so they are unprotected. But the more people around them that are protected by vaccines, the lower their risk of getting measles. That is the strongest case for universal vaccination that you can make. My counter to that.
And that's
go ahead.
That works though. Like that. Yeah, that works. That's a good
It's a strong argument,
especially for people who,
And I think that's the most, for people who think through this issue, that's probably the most convincing argument. And to give the other side credit, I think it is a pretty convincing argument. My counter argument is, first of all, I may love your immunocompromised child, but my primary duty is to my own children. So if I believe my child could be harmed by this vaccine, I'm not required to put my own child at risk for the sake of helping your child. In fact, I have a duty as a parent. My primary duty as a parent is first to protect my own children. I have to protect other people's children as well, but there's an order of charity. There's an order of loves that makes my primary duty to my own family. So that's the first point. The second point is you shouldn't have to force vaccines on people if they really are as safe and effective and good for the common good as vaccine advocates claim. Then there's absolutely no reason to force them on people, because we don't have to send police from door to door to force parents to help their children brush their teeth. Right? We realize brushing your teeth is good for you. We're going to make our kids do it, even if they don't want to do it. 99.999% of parents want to do the best thing for their children, and they actually want to do the best thing for the other children in the neighborhood and at the school and in the Boy Scout club too, right? And so if vaccination rates drop to the point where you're starting to get measles outbreaks, the population will respond to that. People are pretty good at calibrating risks and benefits for themselves. And I think you have to trust people to respond to do the best thing and the right thing under those circumstances. And the idea that some top-down bureaucrats at the public health department know what's best for everyone, I think it's just fundamentally false. I think if there's a major deadly outbreak that people are at risk for, and if there's a vaccine where people are sufficiently confident that the benefits outweigh the potential risks, they're going to voluntarily take the vaccine, right? And the fact that a lot of people are not voluntarily taking the vaccine now is not a problem with those people. It's a problem with the products that you are offering them.
Yeah.
Because you shouldn't have to force someone to take something or to buy something if it's so obviously good for them. The problem right now is that either individual vaccines, it's hard to tell, or the 72 vaccines in total that you're supposed to take on the childhood schedule looks harmful for good reason to many, many people. So the response shouldn't be just shut up and take it. The response should be, let's study this more thoroughly. Let's study the various combinations. Let's study the adjuvants. Let's do real placebo-controlled trials with real placebos.
Oh my gosh, that was my next question. Yes.
Yeah, no, what they're calling placebos are not saline solutions. They're not giving salt water. They're giving everything in the vaccine except the antigen, including adjuvants, which we know can be neurotoxic. That's not a placebo-controlled trial, right? That's a deliberate attempt to include the harmful stuff in both vials so that whatever rates of side effects you get look comparable and there's no separation, right? So that's a total gaming of the system. Again, why would the pharmaceutical company game the system like that? Because they know they're not going to be liable for harms. I guarantee you they won't game the system like that if you take away their liability, because they don't want $40 billion lawsuits on their hands.
Can that be done?
It takes political will. Of course it can be done. It was done by an act of Congress signed by the president. It can be undone by an act of Congress signed by the president. If Americans demand it, that law will change. If Americans don't demand it, that law will not change. So yeah, it can be done.
So it sounds like
I think it will be done anytime soon? It's not looking like it.
Yeah, I know. I know.
On the other hand, COVID woke a lot of people up. I'm seeing way more vaccine skepticism than I saw 10 years ago as a result of the COVID debacle. So, maybe that movement will grow sufficiently where we can sort of right the ship. And but in terms of policy, take away liability and then make sure every state has at least religious and conscience-based exemptions. If not, just you have to opt in and you're not, that would be my preference. But short of that, at least getting exemptions that are actually obtainable, I think is necessary. I don't think we should force these products on people.
So it almost sounds like that's step one. Before requesting or demanding alternative options, we should remove the liability shield.
Yeah, I think that would take care of 90% of the problem. I think you'd see a lot of new vaccines being developed. And the ones that went to market would be probably safer than the ones that we have. Mm-hmm. Companies would be much more judicious about, how many vaccines they're recommending. So that would go a long way. We've set ourselves up for the kind of problems that we have now by bad public policy. It's easy to shake your fist at big, bad, greedy pharma. And I can do that too. But the fact is the American people gave them a free pass. And that's on us.
Side note, you know that they're trying to do that with pesticides, specifically glyphosate right now.
I didn't know that. I've heard buzz about glyphosate, but
yeah, they're trying to make it free of immunity as well, because obviously lots of issues.
yeah,
Health
right.
issues with it.
I mean, look, it's a great business model.
Yes.
If I want to make billions of dollars, convince Congress that I'm not responsible for problems that my product causes, so I can never get sued. And in fact, if my product harms people, the federal government is going to pay those people, not me.
Honestly, what?
Second element of the business model, get the CDC to recommend it, which then becomes required in almost every state. So force people to take your product, right? And third element, the people who are taking the product don't have to pay for it.
Yeah.
It's paid for tax.
You can charge whatever you want for it.
Paid for by taxpayer dollars.
It's brilliant. It truly is brilliant.
It's like, I got to hand it to these people. And it goes on forever and ever and ever. I mean, once you get your MMR on the vaccine schedule, you just keep manufacturing that product every year, and it's a cash cow, right?
It's unbelievable.
I got to hand it to these people. Like, good for you. You got in bed with the state. You came up with a sort of fascist. By the way, people throw that word around all the time. What fascism literally means is the melding of state and corporate power, right? So, so if
we want to talk about fascism,
we want to talk about fascism. That's literally what Italian fascism was, by definition. Benito Mussolini and the philosopher of fascism, Giovanni Gentile, described it as the merging of state and corporate power, right? Which is exactly what you have with the vaccine regime. And so these private firms are getting rich on public funding, public protection, and on a government that forces every young person in the country to take their product. So hats off, a brilliant move, and shame on us for allowing it to happen is all I have to say. The American people, it's just your own fault.
I'm dying to know, is it true that physicians in private practice get paid a certain amount or get bonuses if everybody in their practice is fully inoculated?
It was true of the COVID shot. But for most other shots, it's much more indirect, because it's not that they're paying you directly to, give a certain number of MMRs or Tdap shots. It's that the fact that a kid between the age of 0 and 12 years old, has to come in to your office a certain number of times to get a shot, you're billing insurance every time he does that. Right? So these are typically healthy kids that otherwise wouldn't be showing up to the pediatrician. Think of how many pediatrician visits there are whose only purpose is do a quick checkup, look in your ears, and then give you 2 or 3 shots, right? So they make money because it brings kids into the office that otherwise wouldn't come into the office. And every time you do that, the physician can bill, Medicaid or Kaiser or the private insurance, Blue Shield or whatever for the visit. So that's the way in which physicians make money on vaccines, is because it drives traffic through their office.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, in addition to that, we now know the government was paying and or penalizing physicians for COVID vaccine rates among their practice. That's why some practices were kicking you out if you wouldn't take the COVID vaccine. I forget what it was, but 85% and above, then you get money. And it's like, okay, so I'm just going to fire all the patients who are refusing the COVID vaccine to get my number up above that 85% threshold. But most of the time it's not that. Most of the time it's just the fact that this is how we get traffic coming through the doctor's office, and that's when you can bill for visits.
Well, and on the other side of that, the family practice that we were going to during COVID, was they were one of those ones that would give vaccines, but most of their patients were we're going to use the term anti-vax. And they ended up going out of business because all of their contracts that they had with the insurance companies were not getting paid. So the insurance companies were not paying them in a timely manner. It's taking them like 90 days or something ridiculous to pay the physician or the doctor's office. And so they ended up going out of business because they couldn't pay their staff.
Yeah.
Because they weren't getting paid by the insurance companies because they weren't giving anybody vaccines. It was insane.
Well, okay. So I want to ask a few questions for the listener that maybe is within network, has to use insurance for whatever reason. And how can parents navigate recommendations for their children from organizations like the AAP? So like, let's say, you want to follow the my AAP.
Family.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have to be well, I guess my kids are homeschooled, so I don't have to follow, public school mandates. But, we go places due to who takes our insurance.
No, it's a very tricky problem because so many family docs and pediatricians won't be reasonable about respecting patient autonomy and in regards to vaccines. So I think you have to do your best to try to find someone who's at least going to be respectful and not harass you about it if you're declining, one or more or all vaccines. But I wouldn't cave in. And in my experience, even in California, where it's really, really hard to practice without vaccinating everyone, it's really, really hard to give exemptions. There still are physicians here who will try to be reasonable with you. So they're out there; they can be found. And I actually think the ranks of physicians who are vaccine skeptical is growing as well. In the wake of COVID, I think more doctors are asking questions about the propaganda that they were given in medical school, and going back and actually looking at the studies and recognizing the poor quality of so many studies that were used to authorize these products. Starting with the Hep B, which was tested on like 12 healthy adults for a week, and then given to newborns on day 1 of life. Yeah. The information is out there and available for anyone who cares to look. The problem is in medical school, all we got was sort of propaganda. But I think more and more doctors are waking up. And I think this health freedom movement is growing, and it's impacting more and more physicians, especially younger ones. So yeah, I don't have any knockdown advice on that except to just ask around in your community and see if you can locate. And sometimes they maintain a low profile and they're sort of quiet and they don't advertise that I'm, sort of friendly to patient autonomy in this regard. But, do your best within your own communities to sniff them out and find them and give them your business. There's also models developing where you can do an end run around the insurance companies. So direct primary care is one sort of new model that I talk about toward the end of the book. Other, sort of subscription service type arrangements that are not as expensive as concierge medicine. I mean, for those who can afford it, concierge physician can be an option where you're more or less paying for most of the things out of pocket and you don't have to deal with the insurance bureaucracy. But there are other models like the direct primary care model, which is sort of a pooled subscription service kind of healthcare delivery model that are popping up here and there. So I think we need creative solutions like that to get around the top-down managerialist bureaucracy that's currently controlling medicine. That's a major theme of the last couple chapters in my book.
Yeah. Yeah, and shameless plug for Weston A. Price Foundation chapter leaders. Sometimes those individuals have lists of more holistic practitioners and things like that. Can we shift to mental health?
Sure.
Ask a few questions about mental health, maybe? So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on the declining mental health of the American population, specifically teens? My goodness.
It's bad. It's a sign of a society that is not conducive to human flourishing, especially for young people. I think there's many reasons for that. But even prior to COVID, there was a rise in so-called deaths of despair. Ann Case and Angus Deaton, Nobel Prize winning social scientists at Princeton, wrote an article and then a book in 2018 called Deaths of Despair. And that's death by drug overdose, alcohol-related illnesses, and suicide. That's been on the rise since about 1999. Suicide rates have gone up in both men and women in every age group since 1999, except for the very elderly. Wow. Those over the age of 75 have seen a slight decline in suicide. Everyone else has gone up, with suicide also happening at younger and younger ages. So not that long ago, when I was in residency training program, conventional wisdom is kids prior to puberty don't kill themselves. Tragically, that's not true anymore. We see suicides of kids under the age of 10 now. 10 to 13-year-old girls, suicide rates have tripled since 1999. Then COVID threw gasoline on that fire because of the prolonged lockdowns and school closures and masking. So in 1999, we had 20,000 drug overdose deaths per year in the United States, which is a tragic number. That had risen to 70,000 by 2018. 2 years later, after the lockdowns, it went from 70,000 to 100,000.
Oh my gosh.
Now, how many people turned on the TV during COVID where all they were talking about was COVID deaths and heard 100,000 people died this year of drug overdose in the United States? Same thing happened with alcohol-related deaths. They went from 69,000 to 99,000 during lockdowns. I think suicide deaths are pushing 50,000 a year in the United States now. So what's going on? Yeah. I mean, this is terrible. The factors are complicated, but family breakdown, community breakdown, screen time, loneliness. There's an epidemic of loneliness in the United States that puts people at risk of depression and anxiety. So as much as I don't like former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, he was one of the defendants in one of the other lawsuits that I filed against the federal government that we didn't have time to talk about, a free speech lawsuit called Missouri v. Biden that went to the Supreme Court. But Murthy in 2018 did do something good, which was to point our attention to the epidemic of loneliness in the United States and the adverse, not just mental health, but physical health of loneliness was comparable to smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. It increases your risk of heart disease, cancer, and other leading causes of death. Back in the 1980s, if you polled Americans and said, do you have someone important in your life? Do you have someone in your life with whom you can discuss important things? A family member, a friend, a colleague at work. You know, you're going through a difficult time, you're going through a divorce, you're struggling with something. 80% of Americans said, yes, I have someone like that in my life. 20% of people said no, which is terrible, actually, if you think about it, 1 in 5. Well, today that number is of people who don't have anyone has doubled to 40%.
Oh, wow.
So 4 in 10 Americans have no one in their life with whom they can discuss important matters, which has terrible effects on mental health, actually has terrible effects on physical health as well. So the loneliness epidemic got some attention before COVID, and then suddenly we forgot about it because we forced loneliness on the population by social distancing. And yeah, we threw gasoline on that fire too. So the need to rebuild communities, the need to rebuild the ability to interact face to face, because, you know, we're doing this on screens and it's great. It's great technology, you know, for producing a podcast. But if this is my only method of interacting with people, there's something seriously missing in my relationships and my connections with other people. My colleague at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, Claire Morrell, just came out with a book called The Tech Exit. You guys should definitely interview Claire. She's brilliant, terrific. And she's looking at the adverse effects of screen time on adolescent mental health and childhood mental and physical health. The effects of social media certainly playing a role as well. So I think those are a few of the factors. There's no doubt others. There's no doubt environmental toxins and endocrine disruptors that are also playing a role in, the serious mental health crisis. But Americans have never struggled with rates of depression and anxiety that are as high as they are now.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, do you think the over-medicalization has anything to do with it? So
yeah, that's a
I don't
great
know, for
question.
example, like as a postpartum mom, you go to the doctor, or actually even during your pregnancy, you go to the OBGYN and they hand you pieces of paper constantly, like every time you go, that says, are you depressed? How are you feeling? Do you feel sad? Do you feel anxious? And postpartum, it's the same thing. And even if you weren't feeling that way, suddenly you're constantly getting a barrage of questions and you start thinking, well, should I be feeling this way?
Yeah.
Or you just like overthink it. Like, well, I cried a little bit because, like
there is a danger of medicalizing ordinary discontent and unhappiness, and giving people Prozac for the everyday blues. I've written on that issue in the past. An article called "Cosmetic Drugs for Mental Makeovers." So these things can be overprescribed, and that's not helpful. The other thing that's not helpful is when people are struggling with these issues, if the approach is just totally reductionistic and just purely biological, then you're missing a lot of things that are necessary to help people recover. So, and I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Medications have a role in treating mental illness. I prescribe them routinely, but not all of my patients get medications. And sometimes my job is actually they come in on a bunch of medications and they're still not feeling well. And my job is to get them off medications or to simplify their regimen. But if the only thing your doctor is doing, if you're struggling, let's say with depression or severe anxiety, if the only thing your doctor does is prescribe a medication, which again may have some utility and may be indicated, may be helpful. I'm not denigrating that, but if that's the only thing that they do, then you're probably being shortchanged, right? Because you need to look at dietary factors. You need to look at exercise. You need to look at physical activity. There's a lot of robust research on exercise for mild to moderate depression, 30 to 40 minutes, 4 more days a week of aerobic exercise is as effective as an antidepressant medication for mild to moderate depression. More severe forms of depression, not so much. Harder to be physically active if you literally can't get out of bed. But at least when depression is in its mild stage, if you don't initiate a program of physical activity, of healthy diet, of retraining your circadian rhythm and getting your sleep in order, in addition to the medications, then you're doing the patient a disservice. Psychotherapy is most of what I do in my clinical practice is actually talk therapy and behavioral therapy to help people make some of these modifications that will improve their mental health and improve their relationships and so forth. And we know medications alone are effective for depression. We know psychotherapy alone is effective for depression, but we also know you get better results when you put both together. So, my approach is very often not either or, it's both and. Okay, let's and certainly there's some patients that don't want medications and I respect that. And so let's find other treatment approaches, that can help you to deal with this. But what's happened generally in medicine is, and part of this is that there are just too few psychiatrists. It's really hard to get in to see them. And, I don't want to throw primary care docs under the bus because they have a really hard job and they're working really hard. And, the insurance companies force them to have visits that are 12 minutes long. And, you just can't sit down and do a robust course of psychotherapy in 12, 13 minutes with a patient who walks into your office. So it is easier to write a prescription. At least I feel like I'm trying to do something for this person. But that can lead to overprescription. That can lead to kind of inadequate assessments that don't dig into all the various causes, some of which are biological and genetic, but others of which are psychological, social, cultural, environmental, relational. And so I think there is a need to train holistic mental health professionals, more of them, that can take a broad approach to addressing mental health issues and mental illness that gets away from the just kind of biological reductionism. This is a chemical imbalance in your brain, so the only thing to be done is to give you a prescription, which grossly oversimplifies the nature of mental illness.
Yeah. How do you think parents?
What about sorry, I want to ask about like ADD and ADHD for children.
Yeah.
Because would you say the same thing when it comes to kids that are being put on these medications for attention and fidgeting and all of that?
Yeah, again, very often these are going to be prescribed by pediatricians after, one or two visits with a sort of cursory assessment of the problem and a really robust assessment for ADHD, which is a real phenomenon, by the way. I'm not someone who disbelieves
for sure
in the diagnosis. But it requires, thorough evaluation requires obviously an in-person evaluation of the child, feedback and surveys of the parents, feedback and surveys from teachers, people who observe the child in various contexts, who can give input. And then I think the judicious use of stimulant medications and other medications for ADD for some children with that condition can be very effective. But not all children respond well to them. There are side effects and risks for some children. And there are other behavioral approaches to ADHD that should also be implemented at the same time. And also, I think ADHD is just overdiagnosed. And so these stimulants are often overprescribed, sometimes by psychiatrists, but very often by very busy pediatricians and primary care physicians. Again, not because they're bad people or they don't care. It's just because they're doing the best they can, working within a system that doesn't allow them to really assess the problem thoroughly and, sort of come up with a more holistic approach to trying to deal with it. So again, this is another one of those issues where I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Some kids really do benefit from stimulants and wouldn't be able to manage academically or otherwise without them. They can be life-changing and life-altering for people. But they're not for every kid who has a fidget problem. And, in some cases they can be harmful. In many cases they can be misused and abused. And so we have to be careful. These are, powerful drugs.
Out of curiosity, have you ever seen the connection between trauma and ADHD?
Sure. I have. Yeah.
So trauma as a cause of ADHD.
I would say trauma is a contributing factor to ADHD. Okay. Yeah. ADHD probably has a stronger genetic component than most other mental illnesses, but nothing that we treat as psychiatrists is purely genetic. So there are environmental factors that play a role. Trauma can be one of those factors that is contributory. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Corey?
I was just going to say, if parents are dealing with a child whose teachers have said, you've got to go get them on something, because I can't handle them in my class or whatever.
Yeah.
What would you say? What advice would you give to them?
I would say get a thorough evaluation from a child and adolescent psychiatrist who's going to evaluate this in a 360-degree sort of comprehensive way. Entertain the idea that the teacher might be right. Also entertain the idea that the teacher might be wrong. Maybe the problem is not with the kid. Maybe the problem is with the teacher. Maybe the problem is there's too many kids in the classroom. Maybe the problem is the school administration is not giving the teacher the resources she needs. Who knows? Could be any number of things. So, I mean, again, most teachers I've met are well-meaning people that don't want to hurt kids. And so I think you should not dismiss it if a teacher says something like that. But I think you should also not just, grab your kid, run to the pediatrician, and in a 10-minute visit, get a stimulant for a prescription for Adderall.
Mm-hmm.
Because teachers are not qualified they're qualified to give input and to provide observations, maybe, fill out a survey that goes to the evaluating physician, but they're not qualified to diagnose ADHD, much less recommend whether or not a kid should be on a medication or not. So, so take it under advisement, and I would follow up on it, but make sure that whatever evaluation you get is done by someone who's careful and judicious, and not, not in a hurry and not trigger happy with the prescription pad.
Along a similar vein, what advice could you give to parents who are trying to prevent anxiety and depression in their kids?
Establish a good, strong relationship with your child. The quality of what we call early attachment relationships, which begin in infancy and continue throughout childhood, are not the only, but a major factor in helping your child feel safe and secure and reducing their risk for depression and anxiety. It doesn't mean if your kid has depression and anxiety, it's because they have an insecure attachment relationship with you, but that is a common factor that contributes, and that's something that is within a parent's control. So spend more face time with your children. Give your children lots of physical affection, lots of accurate affirmation, and just pay close attention and listen to them, and also help them to understand if they're struggling, that's okay, that you're here to talk to them about that. There's nothing shameful about, struggling with bad thoughts or struggling with fears and anxieties. And if it gets to the point where it seems to be impairing the child's ability to function, right? There's school refusal, there's isolation, not wanting to hang out with my friends, there's not getting my homework done, then find a competent child psychiatrist or child psychologist, and don't be afraid to, bring your kid in and get some help and get some advice for this.
I wanted to ask a little bit, because I want to go back to the topic of ethics in medicine and in, within that field. A lot of times, people will say things like, the only reason that you believe this is because of your religion. So how do you address that? Do ethics come from religion, or morals come from religion, or can we have them outside of a religious context?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question that would require about 2 hours for me.
Yeah, I bet.
to answer. Let me see if I can give you the 60-second
another book
version.
Coming.
I think I think
just
as
credit me a little bit in the beginning of the book.
as a sociological fact, I think most people get their ethical principles from their religion. But I believe also in the concept of there being a natural moral law, that it's easy for our conscience to become clouded. It's easy for our conscience to become corrupted. But it is possible for a well-working conscience to discern that certain things are good and certain things are evil, right? I think everyone innately knows, the most basic ethical precept: do good and avoid evil, which sounds so generic and so general that, it's not very specified. Okay, well, what does that mean? But I think you can come to certain conclusions outside of a religious context of a moral nature, right? So you can recognize that it's wrong to kill people. You can recognize that it's wrong to lie. You can recognize that it's, especially egregious to lie under oath, you can recognize that it's wrong to steal. And actually, just going back to my own sort of background in Catholic theology, probably the most famous Catholic theologian is St. Thomas Aquinas. And he asked a very interesting question along these lines, because he talked about this idea of a natural moral law that everyone, Christian or non-Christian, religious or non-religious, is at least capable of knowing. Then he says, well, if we have this natural moral law, if people are capable of knowing that it's wrong to kill, it's wrong to steal, that it's wrong, why would God reveal the 10 Commandments to Moses, which are sort of just an articulation of those principles, right? And he said, well, the reason is that God wanted to help us be more certain. Because of our fallen nature, because of the effects of original sin, our conscience, our intellect can become easily clouded. It can be easily swayed by disordered emotions. And, if you look around the world, while it's possible to know that it's wrong to kill, there's still a lot of killing going on. There's still a lot of stealing going on. There's still a lot of adultery going on. And so it seems pretty easy for people, fallen, weak creatures that we are, to ignore and or forget and or rationalize away what we should be able to know. And therefore, to give us additional help, God gave us divine revelation. And so it's a little bit of a both and answer to the question. Can there be virtuous atheists or agnostics? I think so. Is it easier to be virtuous if you have the benefit of religion? I think in most cases, almost certainly, because it strengthens convictions that should already be there. But again, human beings being what they are, we can very easily sort of rationalize or make excuses, or just let our passions overcome what we know to be true, because we want what we want. So that's a short answer to a very actually interesting and complicated question.
I know that's one of those questions that my husband and I have had multiple conversations about.
Yeah.
And
I go
usually
back
road trip conversations.
Yeah. I mean, the famous Russian novelist Dostoevsky has a line in the Brothers Karamazov where he says, if God is dead, everything is permissible.
Right.
And so, and I also, on my more pessimistic days, I think, yeah, but Dostoevsky was probably right, actually. Even though theoretically we can know the precepts of the natural moral law, probably without God's grace, it's impossible for us to actually maintain those convictions and follow them. And I think we see a lot of empirical evidence for that claim that if God is dead, everything is permissible. So on that note,
I know. I was about to say
I have to wrap up. I got a patient
totally.
arriving.
No, this is a good ending note.
Yeah, we ended on some heavy philosophy, religion questions.
Good. We'll leave people things to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, Aaron. Well, why don't you give our listeners some the information on where they can find your books, the titles of them, where they can connect with you if you have social media and all of that.
Sure. So the book we discussed today, the main one, is the one that just came out a week or two ago. It's called Making the Cut: How to Heal Modern Medicine. And you can purchase that at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold. My previous book that focuses more on what happened to us during COVID is called The New Abnormal. The subtitle is The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. And that's also available on Amazon and other booksellers. Yeah, that's the stiff drink.
It's so juicy, though.
Single malt scotch.
Oh my gosh.
Book. And I think the books can be read together. I mean, there's interesting ways in which the second book kind of grows out of some of the themes in the first. I have an older book called The Catholic Guide to Depression that I wrote. It's much more specifically religious, book. So if you know of, and I think it's, it was written from a Catholic theological perspective, but certainly Protestant and Orthodox Christians would find, everything in that book to be congenial to them as well. So if you know of some Christian who's struggling with depression, that may be a helpful book. I'm on Twitter at Aaron Kheriaty, MD, and I have a Substack newsletter called Human Flourishing, where I publish and republish my various articles on bioethics topics.
Excellent.
Fascinating. Yeah. All right.
Okay, well, let me do the really quick with Christine and I. So I'm at Christine's at Nurse Littles. I'm at For Nutrient's Sake. The show is at Modern Ancestral Mamas. You can get in contact with us on Instagram. You can watch the show on YouTube, and you can listen to the show wherever you get audio podcasts. We love you guys. Thank you so much for joining us, Aaron, and thank you to our MAM listeners. That's all we have for today.
Thank
Bye.
you. I enjoyed the conversation.